Hello, film fans. Welcome to All the Film Things. I'm your host, Elizabeth. Thank you for listening. This is the 90th episode of All the Film Things. I know it appears to everyone as the 44th, but this podcast has been going on for 3 years, and this is only the wide release, so 90 episodes in, almost to 100. Wanted to keep you all updated on that. The 100th episode is approaching. Very exciting, and I'm so grateful to everyone who has come on in the past 3 years, and everyone who listens. I'm so grateful. And if you are enjoying this podcast, please leave a review and a rating. Also follow All the Film Things on Instagram for updates and more film things. Today, I am talking with Steven Bernstein. Steven Bernstein is an award-winning screenwriter, novelist, and film director who's been working in the industry for nearly 40 years behind the camera, often as a cinematographer, under the direction of acclaimed filmmakers from Noah Baumbach to Patty Jenkins before directing his own films. In the beginning of his career, Steven worked as a cinematographer on commercials in the UK, which earned him many awards, including a Golden Lion at the Cannes Film Festival. He is a member of the Directors Guild of America, the American Society of Cinematographers, the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, and wrote the best-selling film textbook, Film Production, published through Focal Press. He has been the director of photography on nearly 50 films, some of which include critically acclaimed films like Water for Chocolate and Monster, and beloved comedies such as The Waterboy and White Chicks. Alongside Emmanuel Lubezki, Steven earned the Best Artistic Contribution Award at the Tokyo International Film Festival for his work on the 1993 film Like Water for Chocolate. Steven's directorial feature film debut, Decoding Annie Parker, earned him the Alfred P. Sloan Feature Film Prize at the 2013 Hamptons International Film Festival, and his sophomore directorial feature, Last Call, was hailed as Oscar-worthy and earned lead actor Rhys Ifans the Best Actor Award at the Tallinn Black Nights Film Festival. Aside from his work on set, Steven co-hosts the terrific and insightful weekly podcast Filmmaker and Fans, which I bet you can find on the same platform you're listening to this episode. Steven's debut novel, titled GRQ Get Rich Quick, was recently published through Fly on the Wall Press on June 3rd, and the feature film based on the book will be having a worldwide release this year. We will be talking more about both the book and the film soon, but buy your copy of GRQ now wherever books are sold. Steven, thank you so much for joining me today.
My great pleasure.
I'm so happy to have you on. I've been looking forward to this for a while because we got connected through Instagram, so this is a long time coming. I'm so excited. I have plenty of questions, so as always, we unfortunately won't be able to get through all of them or to be able to devote as much time to certain projects, but I will try my best to make this a well-rounded interview. Through preparing for this interview, I've been astonished by your understanding and articulation of cinema and filmmaking in every phase. You give advice through both your Instagram and podcast, as well as seminars of the knowledge you've accumulated over the years. So I'm very curious to learn how you first fell in love with cinema.
Well, like anybody, I went to movies a lot when I was younger. And of course, it was a different world then, and people would go out to the cinema more. And when you see something on a big screen, it tends to have, I think, a more profound impact on you than seeing something on a small screen, however big your home screen is. And there weren't really home screens to look at things then when I first started. And a couple of films. First one was called Lawrence of Arabia, David Lean, by Freddie Young, which was such a stunning film. I saw it on a huge screen in Buffalo, New York, where I was born. And I remember it being overwhelming to me. And then later, when I was doing postgraduate work, I saw another film called Days of Heaven, shot by cinematographer Nestor Almendros. And that had such a profound impact on me in terms of coming to understand that film doesn't only work by narrative and storytelling. So often you'll hear filmmakers say, we're storytellers. I don't really believe that's wholly true. I think we're experience creators. And when you see a spectacular painting, or when you go to Niagara Falls, for example, it's near Buffalo, and you look at it, you're viscerally impacted by what you're experiencing. There's not a narrative there. Water is going over a cliff and landing somewhere else and making a big noise and throwing mist up in the air. That's not a story, but it has a visceral impact on you. When you look at Days of Heaven or films like that, The Conversation is another great film, The Conformist, another great film, Apocalypse Now, another great film, so many that are stunningly viscerally impactful on the viewer, that's when I realized that film works in many different parallel languages. Sure, it works in the narrative language of script. It works in terms of character and characterization, but it also works as a visual source and a visual impact and a visual experience. And that's when I fell in love first with cinematography. Later, as I evolved as a writer and as an artist, I realized that the greatest thing you can do as a filmmaker is to combine all the different languages of film, work with script absolutely to create elegant narrative, work with cinematography to create visceral reactions, but also to tell story. As I put a big close-up on someone, has a much bigger impact than, say, a wide shot. Those are choices that I make that are to do with the storytelling, separate from the visceral element. Use music, which again can be visceral or can be narrative. Use production design, use costume design. All these things combine, all these different varied and related languages in concert with each other to create the experience of film. And when I realized that as a writer, as an artist, as a thinker, that I can combine these things to express myself, I realized it's the only medium that I could really work in, because it's ultimately the most engaging, reaches the widest audience, and I think has the greatest impact for an artist to use.
Absolutely. And I know one of your biggest influences has been Alfred Hitchcock. Even his film Rear Window was the first episode of your podcast. Do you remember the first time you saw a Hitchcock film?
I don't remember the first. I grew up watching Hitchcock film. I think probably the first one was, my brother stuck me out to see Psycho, which I think was probably banned for a person my age at the time. And the great thing about horror films, and Hitchcock in particular, is whether you like horror or not, if you want to understand the way cinema works, look at a horror film. Going back to what I was just talking about a moment ago, the visceral, you can have a sequence in a horror film that really does very little to advance a plot or to explain a character or to alter a perception of narrative. But it can still engage the audience with a primal fear, pulling a trigger that causes a primal fear. That's not storytelling. That's simply pushing buttons in an audience to elicit a reaction. When you understand there's things you can do in cinema that elicit reaction, separate from narrative, you come to a much better fundamental understanding of what film is. So that's one of the things I loved about Hitchcock. And then Hitchcock would take that visceral element, that visual element, that thing that triggers a response, and then take it to a different intellectual place. Hitchcock, a Catholic thinker, felt very much in the idea of original sin. And so all his characters are in some way greater or lesser corrupt and corrupted because they're incapable of pure virtue. So what Hitchcock does very cleverly in his films is we are in a position where we are seeing the world through the perspective of a villain and therefore sympathizing with the villain, even though that person, of course, is morally bankrupt. So what Hitchcock realized was morality is a relative measure to do with your perspective. And then he integrated that with our visceral experiences. So there's a scene, let's see, it was the film Frenzy, I think it's called, where the killer, serial killer, is in the back of a truck. And the reason he's in the back of a truck is the person he's just murdered has grabbed his stick pin off his tie and is holding it in her hand. And if that's discovered, they'll know who the killer is. So he has to pry her rigor mortis fingers open to get the stick pin back. Meanwhile, as this truck's driving along the road, a car pulls up behind it, and it's a police car. And as he's breaking this dead woman's fingers who he murdered to get the stick pin back, you would think, oh, he's a murderer. Surely we want him to get caught. But this is the fascinating thing. Not only are we horrified by the cracking of the fingers, not only are we excited by the idea of nearly getting caught, which is a visceral reaction, but morally he shifted the perspective. So we're rooting for the villain to get away with his crime to do with our moral relativity. So someone who can combine the visceral with the narrative, with a bigger moral view of the world, and do a philosophic discourse while telling a good story, while engaging us emotionally and physically, that's filmmaking. That's why Hitchcock made me fall in love with film.
His films are truly a visceral experience and truly the master of suspense. And the way you describe the morally complex characters, Pedro Almodovar is very influenced by his films, and he does create that as well, which is really hard to do. You feel bad for characters that, by description, you would never think that you'd feel bad for, which is really incredible and exclusive to cinema, I think, in some ways, to create that whole visceral senses.
And it's really important because, there is no objective world that we can experience. That's what cinema teaches us, is that we think we experience the world objectively, but our objective experience of the world is different from the person sitting next to his objective experience of the world. Ergo, there is no objective experience. Everything is influenced by the prism by which we view the world. So when you have characters who inevitably justify themselves in their behaviors, we realize that they're not neither right or wrong. In their minds, they're right, even though their behaviors, may be wrong. And that's a significant understanding of the human condition.
You mentioned a few films like Days of Heaven, The Conversation, and Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
As someone who champions independent filmmaking, is the new Hollywood era especially of interest to you?
I think that art right now is at risk. I think that people don't appreciate how important art is and how independent voices represented by artists is important in our culture. It's not something that it should be controlled or regulated, as much as we find abhorrent some things that artists seem to think or say. It's essential in a free society and in pluralism that those artists have the opportunity to express their notions. So in most of the history of cinema, as you look back, it's controlled by large studios and production companies because it was so very expensive to make films that what films got made was determined by what some people might characterize as corporate interest, that the studio would make a film that supported a dominant ideology, and they wouldn't do things that were subversive or would challenge existing societal norms. What's great about the democratization of film, the access to equipment that is less expensive, the fact you don't have to go to a laboratory to process film anymore, the fact that lights have become small, of a low temperature and inexpensive, the fact that you can edit on your computer, all these things in concert with each other means that anybody can make a film. And if anybody can make a film, that means that formerly underrepresented voices now can find a platform and reach a large audience within reason. Unfortunately, the distribution network and the streamers are still big corporate interests, and it's very difficult for most people to get their work seen by a great many eyes, but at least the potential is there. And certainly they can create a film and get to a festival and have that film seen at a festival. And what has it engendered? You look at the brilliant Sean Baker, who did, of course, the Florida Project and Nora more recently. And Sean Baker made his first films on his iPhone. And without iPhones, then there would be no Sean Baker. And without Sean Baker, we'd all be culturally poor for it. But then think of important political things that happen in our society and culture that have been witnessed, not just by an individual who bears testimony, but been recorded on camera. A crime, for example, a war crime, for example. All those things now are available and available to the wider culture to then pass judgment on these things. So in one sense, I mourn our collective loss of privacy and the idea that we can no longer make mistakes and errors in private, everything is recorded. But in another sense, if we're interested in social justice and if we're interested in underrepresented voices having access to the media and large audiences, then I think it's a wonderful thing. The other thing about this is that, when a novelist writes a bad novel, and I write novels, you'll say bad novel. You don't say, we'll never let him write a novel ever again. Well, who would possibly say that about a novelist? All it took was he locks himself in his room, or she in her room, and uses some paper or maybe a computer, but we don't stop them from expressing themselves. Fascinating thing about cinema is if you make a film that loses a lot of money, all the people who finance your films will say, we will never give that person money ever again, and their career is over. Well, I got to tell you, a couple of bad Hemingway novels. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote a few bad ones. Every novelist, even Joan Didion, I would argue that there's a couple of her books aren't perfect. No novelist always writes the perfect book, but fortunately they keep having the opportunity to express themselves and again, enriching our culture. In film, it's not just art that we're making. These are commercial enterprises. And if our commercial enterprise fails, then the stockholders who have no particular interest in art, mostly, but have a great deal of interest in the bottom line will say, well, we don't want to risk that again. We'll make sure that this artist can't express themselves in case they lose his money. So I think ultimately it's a good thing. I think it's great that so many people get a chance to express themselves. There's upsides and downsides. I mean, Sundance last year had 7,000 films sent to them to get in the festival. and most of those probably weren't properly seen. So that flood has meant that a lot of quality isn't getting through, but ultimately I think it's a good thing.
I was happy to see that there were calls in Oscar speeches this past year to extend the distribution for theatrical releases, and it seems that theaters are open to that, which I hope that'll change. We'll get to see more independent films, more films coming to not just the big cities, but all around the U.S. so people can have a more variety of films.
I hope that's true. It's a tough model. The reason that independent film died in the cinema is not because people didn't want to see the film. The audience is very much there. In fact, when people are surveyed, they say, would you go to see a good independent film? They say yes. The problem is that it was going back to this idea of big corporations, it was a bad economic model. If you have to make what's called a DCP, which is what you put your film on, if you have to do prints and advertising for the local cinema, if you have to split your revenue with that local cinema, you have to send, say, 2,000 DCPs around the country to the cinemas and then collect the revenue from them. It is a very expensive way of releasing a film. If you release it if you own a streamer, you do one copy, it goes on the streamer, it's on that computer, and it's available for everybody for no cost and no additional print and advertising cost and no marketing and delivery or insurance cost or any of those things. It's a much better economic model. So I'm not saying it was cynical, but it was a very good thing for the streamers to watch cinemas die because they can make more money by showing it on your television. But I don't think it's as good as a cultural experience. I think the cultural experience is people want to get out and see films. And the other thing about, speaking about streamers for a moment, was their model was always unsustainable. This is why the film industry is in crisis right now. You can't pay for films just with subscriptions. And that's what they were trying to do. They dominated the market. They killed independent film. They killed most of cinema so that they could propagate this idea that everything would be on streaming, but then they were losing money. So then when the writers came back and other technicians came back, so you got to pay us more, and we also want a bigger share of the profits, they said, no, we can't do that. We can't afford it because subscriptions won't sustain it. So what's happening now is you're seeing more and more pay-per-view appearing on the streaming service because it's the only way they can make revenue. And of course, it's only one step from pay-per-view to pay at your local cinema. So the whole model is now reverting, and we could end up with cinemas again because it might actually be a sounder economic model than streaming is.
Who would have thought the theater experience is great for everyone, huh? It can work. It can work. We got to get people out to theaters. You were the DP for the film Monster, which earned one of my very favorite actresses, Charlize Theron, her Best Actress Oscar. In an interview, you once recounted her telling you that you were her favorite cinematographer for making the impossible possible, making Charlize look, in her words, so terrible. If you would be so kind and tell me more about the cinematographer-actress relationship you established with Charlize on the film.
Well, she did say that I saved the film. She did have a great time with me. I don't think she ever said to me I was her favorite cinematographer. I may have been her favorite cinematographer on the day, but don't worry about it. That's
sorry.
She was very, very fond of me. No, it's okay. And we had a great relationship. No reason for apology. Certainly at the moment, she was very grateful. What happened was the film was in a bit of trouble. I was working on another film called SWAT, doing the action unit on that. I was invited by my friend Clark Peterson, who was the producer, working with Charlize and brilliant Patty Jenkins, to come to Florida. They didn't offer me very much money, but I read the script. I spoke to Patty, I spoke to Charlize, and I was so impressed by their vision, by their integrity, that I actually left SWAT with the producers early and went and worked on that very, very low budget, that very difficult, troubled movie in Florida, which then went on to, of course, win an Oscar. I should say they had a very hard time selling that film. They were told several times that no one would ever want to buy a film about a serial killer. And of course, they were entirely wrong because it was a breathtaking performance. The point you go to, and the reason Charlize and I became so close, was that there's a synergy between performer and the person operating the lights and the camera. Going to where we began this conversation, which is the idea that cinema is visceral. So the actor understands that the way they're framed will affect an audience's perception of their performance. If I push in the camera very, very close at a key moment and I have the face half lit, no matter what the performer is doing, there will be an emotional reaction in the audience. In fact, the less you light a face typically, the more emotional impact there will be. So there's several sequences in Monster where I barely light Charlize at all. There's a moment where she's underneath the bridge, and she's crying. And I thought, and Patty thought, and Charlize thought, as we discussed it, it would be better if we didn't see her clearly, that we had her in silhouette. And then when we do finally come around to the close-up, I have her at the bottom of the exposure scale, very, very low lighting, and you can just make her out. There's a reason for that. Things that we barely perceive, believe it or not, have a greater emotional impact than things that are brightly lit. Same thing with the color palette. I wanted to have a sense of genuine decay everywhere we looked. The idea that she was living in a corrupted world, and although she had a pure spirit, she had been corrupted by the place that she inhabited. So I worked a lot in pastels. I put filters on the camera that would suck up the higher and more saturated colors to diffuse them and create this sense of decay, moral and otherwise. And then the way we use the camera as well. We wanted to never deny that this character, Eileen Warren, has committed these crimes, but we wanted the audience to be sympathetic with her. So despite this very muted palette, despite this sense of genuine decay and general decay, I actually photographed it compositionally like a romance. I would have big close-ups of Charlize and Christina, and then I would push the camera in slowly at key moments, because when you push a camera in, it increases the emotional impact. So at these horrible moments, and with this woman in blues and greens with terrible teeth and wearing tawdry clothes, the camera would be pushing in like a moment of high romance that you'd see in, say, Pride and Prejudice with Keira Knightley, but lit very, very differently. And then the other thing I would always do is tell Charlize, I tell every actor I work with, both as a director and DP, what the shot is. I would say, we're very close here and we only see your face, so they know that they can monitor their performance. They can modulate it, they can measure it and reduce it, which is very important, I think, in how a performer undertakes their individual role. And then they'll always be looking to the cinematographer to tell them how something is working, how something isn't working. Very often I'll put up a white card next to a lens with no other lights. Why a white card? Because eyes are mirrors. And if you put a white card next to your lens when someone looks up, a little bit of white is reflected in the eyes and the performance is seen through. Same time, I'll say to the actress or an actor, look on the back of your head. I can't see your face at this point, but if you turn around, this light will pick your eyes up. So just so you know, those tools are available to you. So I might do a shot with Charlize and she has her back to me and we hear her speaking, but we don't know what she's feeling. And then at a key moment, she decides to turn and look over the camera, and she knows that at that moment, that'll have the greatest emotional impact. That's the synergy that a good working relationship between a cinematographer and an actor will have. And it's essential because ultimately the audience can only respond to what they see, and the cinematographer determines what they'll see.
Yes, that's true. And I'd heard about how this film was nearly never saw the light of day because of how low budget it was. And to think that people weren't interested in watching a serial killer, and now there's a whole crowd of people that love those true crime movies, true crime documentaries. It's funny how there was a shift over time in that way.
Well, it was particularly the woman cinematographer. It has to do with I think the way women are perceived in the culture was that I don't think anyone objected to male serial killers, but for some reason they felt there was an exclusive masculine purview that women couldn't be serial killers. And they said they didn't want to see women as serial killers. The other thing that Charlize did that was remarkable was, yeah, we did make her look really terrible. And sometimes I feel quite guilty about it because I made a career sometimes making beautiful people more beautiful. And, Charlize would come out without makeup. She had those awful teeth on. She was smoking, which she never does usually. And she saw me looking a little aghast. And she goes, no, this is right for the film. And it was very brave of her because she had made a fortune from her incredible beauty and now was playing against that, which was quite magical. And then I would facilitate how bad she looked. I would use side light rather than front light. Side light brings up the texture and imperfections of the skin, whereas front light flattens it out. So I was side lighting her all the time. You can decide to use long lenses with people, which long lenses or telephoto lenses make backgrounds go out of focus and flattens features and makes people look better. Or you can use a wide angle lens, which makes people look kind of awful. So I was using wide angle lenses right in Charlize's face with side lighting all the time. Everything I could do to subvert her beauty, and she was down with it, and that's what made the film so good.
That's incredible. And that must be pretty rare for actors to allow that and I mean, to win an Oscar for it, but that must be hard for them. Sometimes they might resist that. I know there was in The Shining.
It's a mix, certainly. Yeah. It's a mix. I was going to say absolutely, because sometimes they see themselves as a brand, and if they're a brand, they want to protect their brand and be as beautiful as they can all the time. I worked with another actress who remained unnamed, who was 2.5 hours in makeup, and then would have her assistant standing next to the monitor to see how I was lighting her to make sure she was young and beautiful anyway, but they were making absolutely sure they were protecting their very valuable brand. So absolutely. Sorry, you can say about The Shining.
Oh yes, well, about The Shining, I think it was a lens that Kubrick used on Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall that they really did not like when it was used. I'm forgetting the exact lens, but maybe it was the wide-angle lens that you were discussing, but she always dreaded when she saw that lens come out. She was like, oh, I'm going to look terrible today.
Yeah, because also with the wide-angle lens, because it doesn't magnify much, you have to get in really close to your subject. So they know in the wide angle, it's right there in your face, and it's distorting the face, and it's not pretty. And but of course, in a horror film, it's very, very effective.
I really enjoyed your film, Decoding Annie Parker. It's one that has still sat with me after watching it a few months ago. And every time I eat a burger, I kind of regret it because I think about the scene in which that could cause cancer, which is scary. Let's see. I have so many questions about this film. An important message theme of the film is power through thought, specifically hope and optimism, persevering through challenging circumstances. I was reminded of a lyric from the 30 Seconds to Mars song, World on Fire, that reads, "If we change the way we look at life, the life we look at changes." Do you think that is true? And if so, how has making Decoding Annie Parker changed you and the way you look at life?
What a great question.
Thank you.
And you got exactly to the heart of what the film was about. I do absolutely believe in the force of will, and not to the point of the manifestations and whether people talk about that if you simply want something, you're going to get it. But at the same time, as we were talking before about how two people can look at the same film and experience it differently, we can look at life and not see it as objectively, but experience it differently. And if we see life as a series of potential opportunities, even the pain that life offers us, that it teaches us something about ourselves or about the human condition, then that's of value. If we change our mindset and see everything ultimately of value and see everything as a journey that we're on towards self-actualization or greater understanding or greater sentience, then ultimately we live happier lives. If we presume that the function of life is happiness and we see everything as an obstacle and we see ourselves as victims and hard done by, and that everything is suffering, then we'll experience the world as suffering. If we see the suffering as something of value that makes us grow and gives us a better understanding of self and others, and makes us ultimately better able to appreciate life and not see the function of life as happiness, but of understanding, then we have an entirely different life experience. And that's absolutely what the film is about. If you look at the film very carefully, Annie Parker, the title character, the eponymous character, is looking for a cure for her cancer. She doesn't find it. Everybody thinks and says to me afterwards, wow, she found a cure for cancer. No, she didn't. But what was important was she felt she had agency. So she was attempting to do something that others told her she couldn't do. And when we acquire agency, we feel more engaged with the world, and we feel that we have a greater functionality and we're happier, more evolved people ultimately. So that's very much what the film is about. You know, you mentioned our podcast, Filmmaker and Fans. This is something we come back to a lot on that podcast, because like what you're trying to do here, and we try to do a higher level conversation about the nature of art rather than just, a fan page. We're really trying to talk about how it works. And the thing that we constantly revisit is this idea of how film alters our experience of the world. And that's what all good films should do. I mean, that's what good art should do, is it doesn't just present an entertainment, it alters the audience. And I hope that Decoding Annie Parker, and I hope Last Call, and I hope my new film GRQ, all are altering people's experience of their world to say, oh yeah, there, but for the grace of God goes a character just like me, and this is the way that they behave, and this is what they learned, and maybe that's a valuable application in my own life. I sound pretentious, but that's what I want in my movies and the movies I've worked on. I think the beautiful thing that Patty Jenkins did on Monster was to take someone who was a monster, and I think the title's ironically meant, because even though she is a killer, she's also someone who shares our other human qualities, the desire to love and be loved in its turn, And that's something that we share, and that's what the film was trying to say, and that's why the title is ironically meant.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's pretentious at all. I think you effectively do that through your films, both Decoding Annie Parker and Last Call. You mentioned your new film and the new book, GRQ, Get Rich Quick, your debut novel, a novella to be more specific. Congratulations on your book. It's continuously earning rave reviews. What is GRQ, the book, about?
Well, first of all, thank you for that. We're very flattered by the very positive and remarkable response we're having to the book everywhere that it goes. And not unlike Monster, the title is meant with a bit of irony, because what do you mean by rich when you say you want to get rich quick? I think there's an oft-said thing that everybody wants to get rich, but at what cost? And this is the book, and the film is about a character who has lied to his wife consistently, told her that they're financially stable when they're not. And now the book and the film both open on the eve of the day in which they're going to lose their home, is going to be repossessed. She has no idea this is happening, and he hasn't told her. So now he has a certain number of hours to raise the money to pay off the mortgage company. Otherwise, they're going to repossess, while his wife is very concerned about something going on, while there's earthquakes going on in Los Angeles, and he goes down a slippery slope, and then meets someone who tells him that the way out of his problems is to invest in cryptocurrency. Always a good idea. So he invests everything he has in cryptocurrency and borrows some money he shouldn't borrow, and everything becomes kind of unstuck. And the resolution is a surprising one and a complex one, but goes to much bigger issues, both the film and the book, about what is important. Is it more important to have a house or have a trusting relationship with your wife? Should money be earned or simply got? And if money should just be got, then is there anything that we would do or shouldn't do to get that money? If our behavior is predicated by we think we're doing the right thing for a greater good, does that mean we're allowed to do anything at all? So all those things happen. The book ultimately, and the film, is a thriller. I was kind of surprised there's so much comedy in both. Particularly the book, I think, and my wife, partner, Carolyn Rodney, thinks it's very, very funny book. But everyone all the reviews have been saying it's a edge of your seat thriller, and it's a terrifying ride and all the rest of it. And I guess the thing about a thriller is if you know the outcome when you write it, it's less terrifying to you than it is to the reader. But that's been the reaction. It's a thriller with a lot of comedy elements, and it seems to be working. What's interesting is that the film was actually complete before the book was. I wrote the novel during the pandemic, but then put it aside, wrote a screenplay, remarkably raised the money for the screenplay, got the film made, and then Carolyn kept saying to me, the book's the best thing you've done, the best thing you've done. I revisited it. We found a great agent who turned us on to publishers, and they were very enthusiastic. And then I finished the book, and that's why the book comes out. In fact, I don't know when this broadcast is going, but we're in May. It comes out next month in June. It's been distributed already for review, and saying the reviews are outstanding, but it really hits the bookstores next month.
That's incredible. I'm so excited to watch the film and read the book. It sounds excellent, and that's high praise if that's the best you've done so far. So I hope you're taking it all in, and all these reviews are just incredible. So congratulations.
Yeah. Everyone needs a wife like I have in their life, because she's a truth teller. This idea of truth is very, very important. I'll tell you something about directing actors. If you want to be a good director of actors, never praise them unless it's warranted. Our natural inclination when someone does a performance, or a famous actor, John Malkovich, one day I remember first day on a film on Last Call, and it's John Malkovich. It's John Malkovich. It's John Malkovich. So he does a scene, and of course my first inclination, even though I've been trained to the contrary, was to run over to him and say, "Hey, great work, John. Wow, you're such a great actor." But that's the worst thing I could have done, because it wasn't the note or beat that I wanted. So I went over instead and said, interesting, your choice there, but I think the character is probably thinking this at the time. Don't you agree? And then he altered the performance much better. That then established our relationship from then on, because he knew that rather than me blowing smoke, I would be a truth teller. And this is true of all actors. So later in any film, after you've told an actor a hard truth, when they do something that's good and you say it's good, they don't hesitate to move on. They don't say, "No, I will do one more time." They've learned to trust you. Same thing with the crew. Same thing with everybody you work with. So when you're a creative artist, when you're a writer, you need someone to look at your work and say, as Carolyn sometimes say, "This is great," or say, as Carolyn sometimes say, this is absolute crap and we rewrite. We need truth tellers in our lives, and that's of great value. It's also interesting when you release a film or a book, and again, we talk about this on Filmmakers and Fans a lot, about the relation to audience. And audiences are truth tellers. And if you've not been told the truth up to then, you're in for some brutal surprises. Because when someone pays their $12, they feel they've bought the right to tell you what they really think of your film. And if everyone up to there has been telling you you're great, you're wonderful, you're fantastic, just to make you feel better, and then release a film and you get a bad review, it's a painful surprise. One of the best advantages, one of the great things that happened to us when we were making GRQ was we did a test screening, and people didn't like the film.
Wow.
And there's a lot they did like it, but they didn't like it. We recut the film dramatically based on what we learned from that test screening, and then suddenly our test scores were through the roof and everybody loved the film. But I would not have recut the film had we not first had the opportunity to have people tell us the truth. And that's why GRQ, I guess, is a success, because my partner said, really good, but these are the things that aren't working, and I could go and fix them.
That's incredible. And thank you for telling the story about John Malkovich. I wanted to ask about Last Call, and I have so many more questions for you, but I don't want to go too over time. But thank you so much for joining me, Steven. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to discuss cinema with someone whose passion for film is evident and whose film knowledge is all-encompassing, while also being a stellar filmmaker. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
No, it's don't feel any pressure. Very sweet to have rushed this through. I'm sorry I was a bit late getting on.
My
It's very
fault.
sweet to say I love filmmaking. I love filmmakers. I love the creative process. You know, what you're doing on All the Film Things is kind of your cousin to us at
Yes.
Filmmakers and Fans, because we're both trying to do the same thing, which is not just talk about film as fans, but really come to a better understanding of the process. When you study art, when you study film, you not only come to a better understanding of how to be good filmmakers, you come to a better understanding of yourself, because we express ourselves ultimately through art. And film is one of the richest and most complex of all the art forms, and that's why we do this. And for me, oddly, it's educational for myself as an artist to talk about my art to others, because every time I have to create a sentence or codify a notion, it makes things clearer for me. Same thing with GRQ, the book. I became a clearer thinker for having written the book. I'm a clearer thinker for having directed GRQ. I'm a clearer thinker for those weekly, and you know how arduous it is to do a weekly podcast for Filmmakers and Fans. Even Steve Bernstein, director, writer, even the Instagram, it's hard to maintain these things, and people don't always appreciate you and me and how hard it is. But just the process of thinking about what to say about film, what to say about art, what to say about culture, gives us a better understanding of the world and of ourselves. So you're doing a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. That's incredibly high praise coming from you. And I really enjoyed going through your podcast, because you're right. It's kind of like cousins. It's very similar, the in-depth conversations, focusing on film and filmmaking, looking at it closer and dissecting and analyzing. So I love the comparison. Thank you.
My great pleasure.
GRQ Get Rich Quick was released on June 3rd, so definitely go buy yourself a copy now on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, really wherever books are sold. I'll be sure to include a link to purchase the film in both the episode description and on the All the Film Things Instagram. I'll also keep you all updated on the release of GRQ the movie. Is there a film recommendation, a line from a film, really anything you'd like to conclude our episode with today?
I love all films, and I know a lot of the filmmakers, so I daren't recommend one in preference to all others. I really, I think what's interesting, and I don't want to tout my own work, I do want people to go out and buy the book GRQ in particular, because if you're interested in film, if there's such a thing as a book that's cinematic, this is it. Because I created a lot of visual elements, although through the use of written language. And it was written in a very radical way. The sentence construction is very different. The order and the narrative is very different. So it's constructed much more like a film than a book. So as part of my artistic journey, I'm interested in what people's reaction to it. I didn't know whether people are going to like the book or not. I'm delighted in the fact that people like it so much. But if someone's going to do something from hearing this broadcast, just go out and buy GRQ, and the film will come out later this year, and still have the reference of the book to compare with the film later. So it's a little bit self-serving, but that's what I recommend your audience does. Thanks so much.
Yes, everyone go get GRQ the book. And I'll recommend Decoding Annie Parker for now, because it's an important and inspiring film that everyone should really watch. Thank you again so much for joining me today, Steven. And thank you all for listening. And I would like to conclude our episode with the quote you've cited as your philosophy in a recent episode of your Filmmaker and Fans podcast. When life resembles fantasy, it seems real. Bye, everyone. Special thanks to Steven Bernstein, Dr. Gillian Smith, Cole Echevarria, and Caitlin Miranda. This episode was recorded on May 29th, 2025.